Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome us to today's hybrid KMS CME. As we purpose to normalize, we thought it would be wise for us to have a physical meetup for some of us who are here. And then I'm glad that a team of members are joined online. And I hope you're able to hear us and see what we are doing here in Nairobi. So today's CME is going to be on building the capacity to conduct clinical trials. And we have a host of speakers. But before we get a chance for them to be introduced, I would wish to give this chance to the KEMRI President, Dr. Evolino, to officially welcome all of us. He will tell us whether the people who are attending the meeting virtually also have a chance to have dinner. Dr. Evolino, karibu sana.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. I don't know whether you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you very
well. Good evening, everyone. Professor Ogutu, Mr. Singese, Ms. Mwangi, Mr. Vandenberg, hope I pronounced that correctly, Dr. Mugo, Professor Jaoko, and Dr. Bosire, the EMJ team, KMA Ethics and Research Committee, convener in absentia, Dr. Obonyo, represented here by Dr. Chris Baraza, National Governing Council members, National Executive Council, KMA members and all guests, all protocols observed. Good evening all, and I'd like to welcome you to this clinical trials in East Africa CME. Indeed, it's a timely topic as Kenya Medical Association. We look into actively going into research and encouraging development and participation in local research, especially clinical trials in East African region and especially in Kenya. So we're happy to have guest speakers today to be able to take us through this so that we can be able to learn and see how we can improve as an organization and as a bigger team of healthcare professionals so that we can be able to generate the much needed local data to inform evidence-based medicine in our country. So thank you so much, the speakers, the panelists, and all members who are logged in virtually and those who are on site for joining this important KMA webinar. And we wish you all happy deliberation and hope we'll come up with good learning points which can inform our next step. Thank you. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you so much. And for those opening remarks, I want to go straight to the next session, and I want to invite Rose to come and take us through the session with the respective speakers as we're listening to the discussion.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome all to tonight's webinar. We are very excited about it, and also especially excited because some of what we are going to be hearing today will make it clear what has happened in the recent past that has really increased capacity and our ability to conduct clinical trials. And so we have a very exciting list of speakers lined up for us tonight, and I will be introducing them as they come up. So our first speaker tonight is going to be Dr. Butu, who is a senior chief research officer at Kenya Medical Research Institute, and is also a director of the Center for Research in Therapeutic Sciences at Strathmore University. He's well renowned in conducting a lot of clinical trials, and is going to be the first speaker to lay the foundation for us with regard to what is happening around clinical trials. Welcome, Dr. Butu.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here and possibly just set the stage for what we'll be discussing. Just to look at some of the issues we have, the gaps, or what is in place and where we need to go. But now that we are in the ambit of KEMRI, what we want to see in the next 10 years is moving clinical trials from public health facilities to the private clinics. And we hope people are going to cooperate, because I think that will be the next target for the next coming years as we expand this space. Because I think that's what will make us much more relevant and much more competitive.
Could the camera person focus on Dr. Ogutu?
Still hiding. For political reasons, I'll keep hiding.
We want to see you.
Okay, thank you. I think this was just possibly to get us started so that we can listen to some of the things that are currently happening, which I might not talk about, but the next speakers will be taking us through this. And it's good COVID came. COVID made Kenyans understand what clinical trials are. And they made many mistakes, but they learned a lot in a short time. And I think that gives us the exposure that we need to move this next thing, which basically is that clinical trials is just a way of possibly trying to get people to volunteer to participate in interventions and tests to get new medications to prevent, treat, or manage various disease or medical conditions. And I think that's what we have been doing in the background. Those of us who work in clinical trials, basically, we compare ourselves with the people in the kitchen in the restaurant. Nobody should see you. Yours is to ensure there's enough good drugs or good interventions that are available for the practitioners. And also some of the trials, we just want to see how people respond to new interventions and trying to make and see the effects of what really happened. And that's the backbone of what we do in trials. A number of people have asked questions, why should Kenyans get into clinical trials, even if the products are not developed here? If we don't know how these products work in our population, even if they get registered, we never know how well they perform. And the only way to optimize the treatment for our population is when we do clinical trials and understand. If you look at a simple drug like phenobarbital, a Thai adult will only require 5 milligrams per kilogram body weight of phenobarbital to have conversions terminated. But an African child will require 15 milligrams per kilogram body weight of phenobarbital, the same drug, to stop the conversions. And that's why we need to have these drugs even evaluated and optimized in our population. One of the things that we have been trying to use in clinical trials for a long time is to build the capacity as we gear towards starting to develop products ourselves so that we can start creating the critical mass of people that can do that. And also so that we can build our own framework for product development and also expand this portfolio. And it also brings money to the economy at the end of the day, because if you are going to move towards the biotech stage, where is what the president is singing to us now, that once he has moved that next level, we need to build this ecosystem. The last 2 decades, I've seen quite a marked improvement in clinical trials capacity across the sub-Saharan region. And we have seen quite diversified centers across the East and West and North and South Africa. A bit of it is still there within the Central Africa. Not much has happened over the last couple of years. But also we now have research centers with accredited IRBs. Regulatory authorities are struggling, but they are getting up to that. I know the Kenyans like complaining, but the regulatory authority we have in Kenya is one of the best in the region. So that tells you how much latitude needs to be covered as the other countries move on. We now have AVAREF, which is basically hosted by the WHO Afro, to possibly do cross-country review for a number of protocols, both for the regulators and also the IRBs. And this has been used for multi-center studies. It started off, the first study that the AVAREF ever reviewed was the malaria vaccine phase 3, which was going to happen in 7 countries. And that's how AVAREF was developed. And that has been going on. And we have most of the investigators are now well trained on the things that are required. And a number of centers even within Kenya and the region have been audited by the US FDA and the European Medical Agency to make sure that they are doing their work well and that the products that they possibly have evaluated and say are good, are really good. And none of the centers has been blacklisted after the visit by the FDA or the EMA, which shows that basically the place is fairly mature now. The clinical trials cannot exist in isolation. We need a functional health system. We need to do our case studies well so that we start knowing what are we dealing with so that we can plan out. And then once you get a case study, just like the first case of COVID in China, somebody described it and said that this is not the issue of thing we are used to. And once the description is done, then somebody starts looking at what are the pathogens look like. And that's where we talk of the omics, because nowadays we used to talk about biology. Then we moved on to molecular biology, but now we moved on to genomics, metabolomics, enzymomics, and those are the things that once you identify a new case, you start breaking down the protein and looking at the cellular level and start identifying how does this behave and how does the body behave with it, because you want to see if you're infected with it, what proteins or what genes get upregulated, which ones get downregulated. And that starts helping you understand what would be a possible drug target, what would be a possible vaccine candidate, antigen. And that's where the omics come. Then you have to do your feasibility studies looking at how this is moving. If this framework is not there, then the clinical trials are not going to be designed appropriately. And that's why we have to do our clinical audits to know what is happening, what new things are coming in, and what are the trends of the things that are changing. Then we need to understand our modality well. I think the audits are knowing what is killing the people so that we can inform what we need to do. And with that, then we can now get the target and product optimization that we need. Because once we know the targets where we can develop new products, then we can identify what are these new products and optimize them appropriately, and then move that to translation studies. And then now it's when we go to clinical development, which is the tail end of things. Then we can do our preclinical work. In Kenya, we are lucky we have a good climate institute where we can do preclinical activities, which most countries don't have. And I think now those are some of the things that we need to harness and then to go to clinical trials. And then once we do the clinical trials, we have then get to implementation studies. What currently is happening with the malaria vaccine, it is at that stage to see how well it fits into the health system so that we can know how well to deploy it. Once you do that, then you have to continue with your surveillance. And I think this is the ecosystem that we need to put the clinical trials in. And that's why we need a functional health system, because it cannot exist in isolation. And these are some of the things that we really need. These are some of the things that if we're really doing our mortality audits, then we need to account for the deaths that occur, especially if there are unusual deaths that we don't know. And this is critical. What are going to be some of the outcomes that you want to look for when you're doing your clinical trials? Because I think these are some of the things that we tend to miss out. So basically, the health research ecosystem that supports clinical trials will start from epidemiology, the genomic work, the behavior that the people have, and also the health services framework, the health system is basically the big elephant in the house, which is not functioning. And even no matter what you do, you won't get things getting properly done. Then the implementation science, which is just getting root into our system, because this needs to be tagged along as we run our clinical trials, and all this needs to be in place. We have a legal framework for research, which is fairly weak, which either can make Ogutu do whatever he wants and nobody can hold me accountable, or it can make Ogutu go to jail for something that he has not made a mistake for. And that's why we need to start reviewing that in tandem with the technological developments. And I think that's some of the things that we need to start looking at. If you look at the narcotic mandate, it is fairly wide, but you realize it is very silent of the key things that revolve around health research and possibly clinical trials. Some of the things that we have to deal with, the license for trials, how is this being done? Regulatory approval for research. These are the elements are there, but we need to do much more. And then the ethical approval, how do these dovetail into one another? These are some of the things that we need now to start working on in the background and make sure that those are intended. One of the things we have is a very uneven clinical trial taxation. I'm going to do the work through KEMRI. There's an overhead that the sponsor has to pay. He again has to pay for ethical review charges. Then PPP is waiting for him with another charge. So, and then of course, the also one now has a license. So before you even start a clinical trial, you basically have paid $500,000 Kenya shillings for a large clinical trial. It's like we are gatekeepers. We are not facilitators as a country. And these are some of the things that we have to face head on if we really want to move to where we need to be in clinical trials. Because we have the oversight, how do the IRBs see their mandate? Is it that if I have a study approved in KEMRI, when I want to go and collect data in Kenyatta Hospital, the Kenyatta Ethics Committee wants to review it again. Why can't they say we are the same ecosystem? We have one regulator that have licensed that, so whatever we do should be, basically, I only need to file it, not review it again. And then who becomes the IRB of record, who is held accountable for a study happening in different institutions again? These are things that we are not fully ironed out. We still, the regulatory framework, because we are having quite a bit of teething problems, is in the ECCT, which is the final approval. What is the role of professional bodies in some of these? With the administrative agencies, a number of hospitals will go in at example, we want to review your protocol before you start the study, and they have no framework. All this, and then the civil societies, when we started doing clinical trials in sickness in this country, it was a big issue. We had to go and talk to them and tell them why people with sickle cell need to be in clinical trials. Because somebody is out to harm them. So these are some of the things that one has to give and know how to do this. If you want to import research materials, the Pharmacy and Poison Board want to give you a license for importation. If it is some more devices, you find the medical laboratory board wants to weigh in that they also have no tool. So these are just roadblocks that make sure you don't get your things done. Then the worst comes when it is arrives at the customs. KRA throws a number of spanners in the works. So all these, and then he also has to make sure that the right things are done as you move on. And then you want to know, now, of course, he also wants to weigh in before you import anything. And these are some of the things that we are thinking. If we don't reorganize the landscape, who is doing what? Then one of the things is basically, we don't have a repository for reagents that support health research in the country. So if I want to import something, sometimes it's cheaper to call my friend in the University of Cape Town to send me a reagent than trying to buy it from a vendor in Nairobi. It will take me 6 to 8 months, and I can't move. So we need to start seeing, can KEMRI become the repository and buy these things back and give those who are doing research in the country? These are things that we need to discuss. Then the investigation of product warehousing, which you have not done before. And I think this we have been scouting for, and I think this we listen to towards the end of this today. If you look at what happens in Uganda, if you are a foreign investigator, that's what you go through before you finally get the clinical trial to kick off. So you realize most of the sponsors out there start saying, how many months? This can take you 6 months to 1 year. Are we becoming enablers? Or are we becoming just a roadblock? And these are some of the things that we need to discuss as a professional group to make sure that we can really help our population. This is what the framework that we need to have the right facilities, we need to have the right, which allows us to build capacity for what we need to run clinical trials. And the resources need to be there. And that's where we are lacking depending on that. Then the regulatory framework needs harmonization to make sure this is going on. And a functional health research ecosystem to make sure that all these talk to one another, that we can know what is the problem, when it is coming, then we can plan and possibly do this. We still don't have a very coherent country strategic direction of how we want to move clinical trials. The president has done well. He said, I want to see manufacturing happen. I want to see products developed here. But how are the Kenyan scientists going to start jumping into that to make sure those products that are being developed or being manufactured don't have to come from outside, but have to be developed from within the country? These are some of the things that basically, if we really want to move to the biotech platform, we need much to put in place. We must start building a funding consortium to ensure that we can fund research in country and create some centers of excellence to drive certain things and create a platform for training and product development that we can run across. Not one single institution is going to have the framework. We must make sure that we get the institutions working in sync to know this is my capacity. IPR will do animal studies. KEMRI will be looking at that when it gets to human beings. And then we have the QB, should be doing certain aspects of product development. University of Nairobi can do product characterization. And I think these are some of the things that we need to start looking. We have to start doing bioprospecting. We are not doing, we have a few people at the museums and possibly at the universities going out to look at the plants and the fauna and see to see what is it that they have. But we need to do that in a much more structured way as part of product development. We need to have analytical labs. We are still very weak in statistical. COVID has made a few statisticians come together to support the Minister of Health, but a lot needs to be done. And then we need to get our pharmacogenomics working and also working on our clinical trial facilities. And I think that's what we need by revolving around the issue. This is just basically a framework for those who might be getting into this space. That's how you develop a research center. You start off with a project, because if you develop it, then it without thinking of what you are going to do in it, it will become a white elephant. It has to be based on an activity. Start running from a site, for a project site, and then you can create a research center. And that will make sure that you also develop people and move in tandem, and this is what we need to get across the country. Because currently, as in some of the slides, you see how skewed of the number of clinical trials we have in Kenya are. This is possibly the trajectory to have a good research center will take you 10 years. And there are things that you need to put in place by the time you can call it a center or an institute. It's basically working through a 10-year program. So you need to be patient and resilient enough to survive some of the headaches that come with possibly setting up all these things. So what have we done? We have now, for infectious disease, we have fairly accomplished centers that can do the clinical trials and the basic science research. So the NCDs, the big pharma has been very shy from getting NCD research in the region, but a few of them are taking cue to start experimenting with us to see whether this can be done. But we are basically using the ID platforms and turn them with the NCDs platform, which we think is what we are going to use. And then we also have the health and demographic surveillance platform, which is a very useful tool for long-term follow-up for NCDs, because NCDs are long-term disease that you have for a longer period of time, and we need a community where we can follow them up. And these are the things that we need to put in place. These are some of the things that have been within the region to help build capacity in the last 20 years. Some of them have fallen by the wayside. EDCTP is still fairly strong and is currently trying to make sure that the infrastructure, both human resource, physical infrastructure, and systems are in place to support clinical trials. But we need to start thinking of when we start cleaning ourselves. Because currently now, Kenya is at crossroads. From next year is either Kenya is going to apply to the EDCTP regulations, or Kenyan scientists will not get a grant from the EU. So we are trying to raise against that to make sure that we become compliant. If we talk of phase one or for the first in human studies, there are fairly few centers across the region. These are some of the centers that possibly can do phase one of bioequivalence. In Nairobi, we might just have 2 centers. In Kenya, they have not been very active on that. A number of them are possibly supporting that is one pharmacology unit that was supposed to support this for equivalent study to do drug levels. This is what the phase one facility should look like, what is at KEMRI, but it has been fairly quiet with no much studies happening. This is an insectary that was established for challenge studies where we wanted to use infected mosquitoes to infect people so that we can possibly look at the parasite dynamics. This was a facility that put up in Bagamoyo for the phase one facility. We used it for 1 or 3 studies and also challenge studies. It was a joint activity between Kenya and Tanzania that the scientists were the same across the border, supporting one another. What was happening in Tanzania just to build capacity. And this is the one in Gabon, which is supported heavily by the Germans. And these are the centers across Africa that can now do malaria challenge studies, where we infect people with live parasites, follow them up, and this is now being used for drug and vaccine, early vaccine and drug evaluation. This was identified for the West to allow us to start doing this in Africa, but we have been able to do this in the last 10 years, and now this is fully adapted. Kilifi is now running most of the long-term challenge studies currently at the coast for malaria. And now they want to move other pathogens like Shigella, possibly have challenge model for Shigella and also in the region. This shows you where the nodes of excellence of EDCTP, we have the East African one in green. Those are the countries that form the East African node, which is currently coordinated from IVR in Uganda. Then we have the South African one, which is larger. then the Central Africa one, and then we have the West African one, which is where we have the different colors. So these are basically areas where money is being put by the EDCDP for capacity development, both infrastructure, human resource, and systems in place to make sure things happen. These are some platforms that these have been the main use for developing drugs for leishmaniasis and also treating this intervention. But now the main thing is, can DNI move them beyond leishmaniasis to involve other diseases? The same what was used for trypanosomiasis as well, which in Kenya we don't have much, but it's a bigger problem in the Central African region. These are basically how skewed our clinical trial platforms in country are. They're just on the coast, the ones in Nairobi, then the Lake region, because of malaria has quite a number of them, and then we have possibly in Eldoret. Beyond that, the rest of the country is not covered. And these are some of the things that, as KEMRI, we need to start working on. How do we get this beyond that so that we can get the country covered so that we can know what is going on? For phase one facilities, possibly just have a few in Nairobi, 2 in Nairobi, and possibly 1 in Kilifi. And that's the end. But the drive is that we need to expand that and double the numbers. And this is something that we're now discussing with the government to see how this can be achieved. Basically, these are some of the things that we know, make sure that we can have a phase 1, phase 2, and even get the registration and get the health system evaluation for phase 4. And these are the systems that we now need to put in place and sure that is working. And to do this, what we are trying currently to do is we hope that in another 5 to 10 years, we can have a mapped out the entire country where we have county health observatory units, where we follow up the populations and ensure that we can know what is happening in the health system. So this will be, we take a sub-county and basically map it out and follow up everybody even thrice or twice a year, so that we can monitor all the health interventions being put in, and also we can use it for evaluating any intervention that has been done. And this will be the framework for doing large clinical trials. But we still have very many missing links, and I think that's where we need to get to. And one, the link is missing, everything falls apart. This is what I have demographic surveillance. If you go to the few sites in Western Kenya on the coast, where the houses are numbered and they are visited at least twice or thrice a year, to know what has happened in the family, who has moved in, who has moved out, who has been born, who has died. And then that may help to know, you can map the entire population and know where they are. So if you come to me and tell me run these studies and say, yeah, I have people that age group, I know they are found in these villages, and this is where they are, and we can get them. With that, we can also have the population pyramid for that area, and that can help us, because we do a lot of research, and then map all the health facilities and know where people can be seen and where they can be referred. Then we can use it for this disease heat maps to know where are the HIV patients in this community, where are the people with TB, where are the people coming, so that you can start seeing where, if you are going to intervene, which areas require interventions with it, and also some research as well for follow-up. So there are some key units that we are struggling and now trying to put in place. We need the statistical support, which is still weak, but we are trying to get a number of institutions now together that did. Function of phase 1 facilities. In secretaries, we now have 2 or 3 in Kisumu, Kilifi, and Nairobi, for where we can do the challenge study. But analytical units, fairly few. We're now trying to see how we can come up with central labs in Kenya to support clinical trials. Currently, every investigator sets up a lab. Keeping a lab compliant and accredited is so expensive, and that is quite retarding a number of activities going on. And then we need to start networking all these clinical trial sites and centers across the country and support them, make sure that they can do the right thing. And then really revamp the IPR facility for preclinical trial work and have an integrated training framework, whether it is using different universities, but we need to know what capacities we need to develop and who is going to give those capacities in the country. Still capacity building, soft skill enhancement, which is some of the time, being a doctor is one, but being a doctor that can get things done is a totally different ballgame, because you have to learn to deal with the politicians and the community men and the village. And also dealing with your colleagues, because I think in the medical profession is where we have the biggest egos available, and how to know how to get that landscape. So these are the soft skills that we need to put in place, both management and a few other things. And then diversify our portfolios, look at across things that we can do in the same setup, and be able to create multidisciplinary teams that can work and get things moving, and enhance the visibility of these groups and teams, so that people know where they are, what they can do. And then we still need dependable logistics partners and also those who are doing the warehousing. If I'm going to keep samples for 10 years, KEMRI is not going to do that effectively. We need to start getting people who invest in that, and that becomes their job. Even the forms that we use for studies, we need to get places where people do that, and encourage the private sector to adopt that possibility to get it done. And we need to get together and have our own story as a region, so that we can tell our own story, not somebody telling it for us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gutu. Yes. Dr. Gutu, for that very informative and insightful presentation. I now want to invite the next speaker, who is Mr. Nicodemus Kisangesa, on the role of clinical research organizations in clinical trial capacity building. And as he's setting up, I want to say a few words about him. Mr. Kisangesa is the director of Clean Research Services, which is a mid-sized clinical research organization that is based in Nairobi, with a regional office in Kampala, Uganda, and also Kigali, Rwanda. Over the years, Nick has been involved in capacity building initiatives for clinical research professionals at all levels, including the clinical trial monitors, research assistants, regulatory and site management staff. And he also initiated the current partnership between CleanWin and KEMRI, Institute of Clinical Research at the University of Nairobi, to offer entry and advanced level clinical monitoring training. For the past 5 years, he has trained participants across East African region, including Sudan. He's an experienced clinical research and public health project management consultant who has worked in international, regional, and local level product development partnerships, contract research organizations, academic medical research centers, not-for-profit organizations, and the pharmaceutical industry. He has held different roles in the industry, including local trials and site manager for Janssen Pharmaceuticals, a Johnson & Johnson company, senior clinical research associate at Quintiles before it became IQVIA, clinical research associate at South Africa-based ERAS Global TB Vaccine Foundation, the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. He's also been a study coordinator at the Ghent University affiliated International Center for Reproductive Health. He's also, with all those credentials, he's still wanting to learn more, so he's currently a continuing doctoral student at Edinburgh Business School in the UK, when he completed his professional training in epidemiology, vaccinology, infectious disease, clinical trial research training, and clinical vaccine trials and good clinical practice from the Institute of Tropical Medicine at Antwerp, Belgium, University of Cape Town, George Washington University, and Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health, respectively. He holds a membership at the Association of Clinical Research Professionals in the US, Project Management Institute, and the Institute of Clinical Research in the UK. Welcome, Nick.
Good evening. Thank you so much. I will take you through the role of clinical research organizations in clinical trials capacity building. So, basically we cover introduction about clinical, the rationale behind the capacity development, success stories, opportunities, and the way forward. So we will start with the definitions. Contract research organization is a personal organization, commercial, academic, or another, or even individual contracted by the sponsor. And the sponsor can be a pharmaceutical company, foundation, biotech, to perform one or more functions of trial-related duties and functions of the sponsor. So there's a huge demand for clinical research personnel. And this is increasing each time because of the issues that are coming up, like the increasing number of clinical trials being conducted globally and also locally. So, like we have seen, the increasing number of advertising positions across all in clinical research enterprise, across all types of positions, we have seen an increment of year by year around 9.3%. So in East Africa, it's a home of locally registered CROs and also international ones like IPV and others. So because of that, we need qualified team to enable the pharma companies, biotechs, foundations to deliver essential medicines, essential technologies faster to the market. So basically, if you look at the other side of the slide, these are some of the functions of the CROs. The CROs, they can perform the project initiation, that is coming up with the protocols. They can do feasibilities, looking for investigators to conduct studies. They can do marketing, surveillance, monitoring. They can do regulatory submissions, both for, like in Kenya, Pharmacy Repository Board, for ethics committees. They can help with also importation of products, and also many other aspects, the whole clinical development life cycle. So they can be conducted to any of those functions. So who are we? So for us, we are a small mid-sized CRO. We have offices here in Nairobi, our headquarters, and we have offices in Kigali, Rwanda, and Uganda. We have also local-based consultants in Khartoum and also in Tanzania, where we are running studies on behalf of sponsors. Like in Khartoum, we are doing leishmaniasis, mycetoma studies. In Tanzania, we're doing about TB, diabetes studies. So we provide also clinical development and consulting services, and we subscribe to One Health. That is, we do both human-based kind of clinical trials. We have expertise in delivering projects of life-saving technologies in resource-limited settings. So most of these studies we are involved in, we conduct them in a very remote place like Kacheliba, West Uganda, and very remote places. And also, of course, we also conduct the studies in a high-end place like Nairobi, Mombasa. Yeah, and we have expertise in a highly phase, that is the phase 1s and late phase, and also implementation studies, like, for example, the current malaria vaccine RTSS being implemented. We, as in partnership with another CRO, but pharma, we are the ones who are managing the program for WHO in Ghana, Malawi, and Kenya. So I'll just quickly take you through what we do, but that's what this one all links to how we develop capacity. So we do visibility and site identification. That is, we look for CRA for investigators. We identify hospitals. We now, Professor Wood was saying, we are also now going to start identifying now doctors at their practices so that they can get involved in different therapeutic trials. We do, of course, regulatory submissions, and also we seek for approvals. We do trial capacity development. That is, we help sites to develop essential documents, train them how to write SOPs. We do monitoring, which makes the bulk of any CRO business is clinical trial monitoring, because it's an ongoing process that is done frequently. We do quality assurance audits. We do data management analytics and CRA training. So basically, in summary, it's feasibility and startup, clinical monitoring and management, project management, data science and technology, and strategic consulting. So what's the rationale behind the capacity development we are involved in? So now this is becoming a global priority. We are having higher demand for clinical research professionals because of the workload. If you look at the current registration, like now 2023, we have 300,000 registered clinical trials from the clinical trials.gov. So it captures the clinical trial registry. Anytime you are conducting a clinical trial, you have to register your trial there. So you can see that trajectory. So it is increasing from and going, and because of COVID, we have seen also a huge increment in Kenya. I remember when I looked at the trial registry for Kenya a few years ago, like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we had like 500 or less registered trials. Now I'm seeing over 1,000. So there's also emerging technologies. Because of the changing way of doing studies, we moved from paper. We are on electronic data capture systems using mobile technology. So you have to keep on training the site staff, also the CRO staff, the pharma staff, be able to catch up with the new changes in the environment. So then also there is well-being and safety of research participants, because well-trained staff, they will be able to know how to conduct proper informed consent, do safety reporting, and all those aspects of patient care during the studies. We need also to provide local and global regulatory compliance, because what happens is one of the requirements of ICS-GCP, which is a good clinical practice, is to an investigator needs to have adequate resources, which includes staff and facilities, who are trained and qualified and experienced to conduct trials. And that's one of the inspection findings. For example, if an investigator delegates some study tasks to someone who's not qualified and experienced in that area, maybe, for example, a driver taking informed consent, or a driver performing data entry, maybe they include the data entry if they are IT and something, but of course, some clinical aspects which are supposed to be conducted by qualified physician or a dentist. So also we do this because of ICH compliance, the GCP compliance, because GCP is the guiding. They are the guiding principles on how we do our research. And then also the public confidence. So if for example, someone comes to a trial site and they see another guy they live around with, who is not, maybe they know this person is not a doctor and is performing duties which are supposed to be conducted by a doctor, they lose confidence in that trial site. So public confidence and also efficient and quality. See, when you have qualified staff, it's easy if you conduct your study efficiently and you also maintain quality. Because one of the findings in any inspection audits is issues of data quality. So it's a global call for pushing for and also investing in clinical research workforce. So economists, they have also sent out a huge report on why we need to invest in clinical research workforce, and also why we also need to train the monitors, the people who manage ongoing conduct of a clinical trial. So these are some of the things we do. For example, if we identify a new site and a new doctor maybe conducts a study, we do project management. We can train anyone how to manage the project and also how to run the site. But a site is like a clinic or an hospital or where a clinical trial is conducted. That's basically what we call sites. Then we do the clinical research training. I remember one of the things that I've done for the longest is, especially when you're conducting studies in these very resource-limited areas, is you have to do the typical training of what is a protocol, what is an SOP, what is a source document. You have to take through them all. And also, now you will design policy management systems. You do infrastructure assessments. Like you can see, that's one of our monitors. He was doing some work in Tanzania. You can see it's at the lab. So trying to see whether the machine is calibrated, whether it is serviced, and all that. Then, of course, we do data management. We train them on how to manage data entry platforms, the electronic data capture systems. We train them on the data entry manuals, study management generally, and also how to develop protocols. Not only in some cases, some investigators are involved in developing the protocols. Sometimes also a lot of the cases, sponsors bring the protocols. But we also help them just in terms of interpretation of some things. And also informed consent and other source documents. So one of our flagship training programs is we do it in collaboration with the University of Nairobi, KEMRI Institute of Clinical Research, led by Professor Jaoko and Zala and others. So we have been running this training. It's only training which is done in all of East Africa. This side of Africa, also South Africa, minus Arab North Africa. So we run this training. We have trained now participants from Sudan, so many countries. So we collaborate in partnership with the University of Nairobi. We do the entry and advanced level clinical trials monitoring training and all the other training, GCP, data management, audits. So those are some of the trainings we offer. as cleaning in partnership with the University of Nairobi. Some of our successes, so we have done a lot of site assessments and staff training needs and designed training programs specifically to tailor to fit specific sites. But each site, every trial site, each country, they have different needs. We support them inside, we have supported them inside and trial management. We have supported them on-site and also web-based site staff trainings, entry-level and advanced level monitoring, staff training on GCP and also human service protection, on-site monitoring and oversight. This monitors provides a good opportunity to train site staff or clinical research staff based at research centers. Because when they go there monitoring, they also, when they identify issues, maybe issues of possible deviations, issues of compliance, issues with the submissions, they provide training or guidance on how best is supposed to be done. So we have provided mentorship and internship, like clearly we take 2 interns each 3 months. So we take interns, people who participate in our training program, the University of Nairobi, we take at least 2 for 3 months, 6 months internship, and most of them end up being employed by us. So we have done the partnership with the local universities, University of Nairobi, to provide those skills-based trainings. Some of the opportunities we have is we need also to leverage on the existing colleges and universities like Strathmore to provide both skills-based courses, but also academic programs like masters, PhDs in clinical trials, in clinical research, in clinical research management. Provide mentorship, like Professor Gutu has mentored so many physicians who have ended up being studying even others study coordinators, even others have even gone on to become very senior scientists. And then student leaderships, we continue providing those to CROs. I know that's the biggest focus, hiring entry-level clinical research associates, or even trial assistants. Then you mentor them and say that now they have to speed to run studies. Incorporating clinical research methods to all programs in medical school, so that at least we know those general courses. We can also add clinical research methods in their curriculum, so that everybody have an idea about what clinical research and clinical trials are about. Linkages with global clinical research consortiums, like for example, now we have the East Africa Clinical Research Consortium. We have the collaborative initiative for clinical trials transformation initiative, just Transalerate. They have a lot of materials, a lot of CTTI and the Transalerate. They have a lot of free materials they offer, and also free trainings they can offer to clinical research teams. During pre-qualification and site assessments, monitors and also clinical project managers can use the same opportunity to identify key training needs for the sites that they get involved in, and now design the training programs which can fit to specific sites. For example, if sites that they are having challenges with informed consent process, or how to conduct electronic data capture and data, or how to do submissions. During that point in time, when they identify that need, during now the investigator meeting or site initiation visits, now they can also take that opportunity to train the site staff. So both on-site and remote monitoring is a good opportunity also to train the site clinical research teams at trial centers. Moving forward, we need to invest in clinical research workforce development at all levels, from high school, science clubs, and colleges. Identify training needs for existing clinical research workforce and offer relevant training and mentorship. Stimulate interest in this clinical research enterprise among science and medical graduates. That is, we encourage specialists, doctoral scientists to venture also in clinical trials, because the business by itself, I mean, it has an economic benefit. Provide legal and regulatory framework for certification of clinical research professionals, and also form clinical research professional associations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that presentation. I now would like to invite Ms. Anne Mwangi, who is going to talk to us a little bit about the role of local CROs in site management and positioning. So to say a few words about Anne, she's a qualified project leader with more than 15 years of managing global clinical trials across several therapeutic areas. As the founder of Africa Clinical Trial Solutions, the experience and expertise that she has garnered over the years ensures that their partners benefit from high quality clinical research solutions or clinical trial solutions. Being based in Nairobi, Kenya, she has a very unique perspective about the operational, regulatory, and logistical nuances of running clinical trials in sub-Saharan Africa, some of which were highlighted by Professor Gutu. This has enabled her to offer very unique solutions that facilitate the efficient management and delivery of these crucial studies. A little bit maybe about Africa Clinical Trial Solutions Limited. It has more than 30 years of combined global experience running clinical trials with a specific focus on sub-Saharan Africa. SSA has been particularly underrepresented, contributing approximately to only 2.9% of global clinical trials in the last 2 decades. However, the number of clinical trials in Africa have exponentially grown over the last 5 years. She engages with institutions that have the capability of running ethical clinical trials with well-qualified and experienced doctors with access to large naive patient populations. The bulk of research on the continent has focused on infectious diseases, but with double burden of diseases, there's increasing interest in executing non-communicable disease trials. So their experience in project and site management spans all aspects of clinical trials, from design, implementation, clinical monitoring, data management, investigation of product management, laboratory aspects, and logistical support, all in compliance with Kenyan, regional, and international regulatory standards, which is excellent. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you very much. So thank you for that introduction. And I hadn't realized that you were going to do a little speech about African Clinical Trial Solutions. So yes, we are in the country, we are on the continent. We know that there are challenges that we're facing, but I think we're well equipped to handle these challenges. I think there's nothing that's too big for us to handle. My talk today is about site management and feasibility. We need to make sure that we have competent sites that can capably carry out our clinical trials. As we've heard, there's a huge disease burden, both non-communicable diseases and infectious diseases. So how do we make sure that our sites are effective? I think there are a few key pillars that make a competent site. And this is what site management is. We need to make sure that these key pillars are adequately covered. Key among them is the investigator. So this is the individual who's responsible for the clinical trial. He is the person who will delegate, as we mentioned, who will delegate various activities and responsibilities to individuals who are trained and experienced. But I think we need to start with the patients. How do we identify our patients? How do we know where to go, where to find them? How do we know that they're going to continue through the course of a clinical trial? We need to engage with the communities. And I think there's a really good resource that I've seen sites use that ensures that they have success in maintaining their patients. And this is the community health volunteers. These are individuals who are based in the villages, in the communities. They know what's going on. And if you have them on board, they will follow up, they will ensure that your patients are coming back to sites when required. If they've traveled, you'll find out. And then you have that awful thing of lost follow-up go away. So you ensure that your patients see their way through the clinical trial. The other thing that, as Nick mentioned, is infrastructure. It is key to have infrastructure at site. Also, and then I think this is something that we need to discuss. What is infrastructure? Because sometimes we think that we need to build this capacity in-house, but there are very good tools for outsourcing. So as mentioned previously, labs. There is sometimes a huge burden in setting up a lab when this can be outsourced. We mentioned previously that certification, accreditation, all of this, getting the biologics, the solutions that are required to run these machines, hugely expensive and sometimes time-consuming. So sometimes you can outsource this, go to a reputable lab, have a contract with them, make sure that their machinery is calibrated regularly, ensure that you have the infrastructure that you need without a burdensome load. Research personnel, I won't belabor this point so much because Nick covered this. As per GCP, we do need people who are trained by qualification and experience. This is something, as Nick said, is crucial to the management and success of a clinical trial. And finally, standard operating procedures. I think this is something that when you go to site, and it varies from site to site, sometimes these are geared to a study-specific process. We need to move away from that. These SOPs need to be site-specific, so that whichever study comes, you're not reinventing the wheel. All of these things are already in place, your people are trained. I think this is also something that also helps us keep reproducibility of results. We need to make sure that we can reproduce what we have. The data that's being captured, we need to also think about special populations, about the pediatric group. What sort of informed consent do they require? So these are some of the things that you need to think about when setting up a clinical trial site. What does the local CRO, how do we come into this? I think one of the things that I think are very key and crucial too is contextualizing exactly what the local landscape is. There are many multinational organizations that don't have that on-the-ground experience. We are able to fluidly interact between the international organizations, the local organizations, to make sure that sponsors understand how to successfully execute clinical trials in the region. Now, moving on to visibility, but before I do, I did want to capture some of what the East African landscape looks like. As has been mentioned previously and numerous times, clinical trials in Africa are growing. And I think we, as Kenya particularly, has been a key continental leader. As mentioned previously, the vaccine studies that's just come through. The malaria vaccine, KEMRI, was key to this. So we have these institutions that have a long history in running clinical trials. We also know, as a result of the history of them running clinical trials, that we have a maturing regulatory environment. PPP, as was mentioned, some of the best, best regulatory environments that's come into the region, as well as the ethical committees. With their experience of seeing clinical trials come through, we are getting shorter and shorter timelines. This is specific to Kenya. Uganda, as was shown by Ogutu, slightly different, but nonetheless, all of this experience is crucial to making sure that we can successfully carry out clinical trials. And then diversity. I think this was mentioned previously. We have a very low percentage of representation. And as we carry on, particularly with the population getting more and more non-communicable diseases, we need to be represented. Our data needs to be seen. As Ogutu once again also highlighted, there are marked differences in how we process these compounds. So we need to be in these clinical trials. As a result, there's a huge demand for clinical trial sites. And this is only going to continue to grow. Investigators, researchers, staff, all of this is going to continue growing in the future. So what do we do then? How do we get these new sites coming in that have set up, as per the first slide, they're successful? How do we get them onto the platform? How do we get them onto the stage so that they can be seen by these pharmaceutical companies and other sponsors? What we do as a local CRO often is conduct feasibility studies. We know what's coming in the pipeline. So we can go out to the sites, we can go into the networks and start investigating what disease populations do you have? How can we tap into that disease area? Once we have that information, and this is often top level, we can then go to the sponsor and say, yes, we have X number of sickle cell disease in this population, in this region, Africa, in Rwanda, Kenya. So then the sponsor will say, okay, let's run the study there. So that already then raises that visibility. If we know that you have the patients, we will come to you. As mentioned before, experience is one of the catch-22s that we face. How are you going to get experience if you're not allowed to conduct a clinical trial? We hope that we can leverage the experienced investigators. This is one way we can do that. They can form affiliations, we can join networks, site management organizations that are often fronted by a key opinion leader. This then enables some of the younger researchers to come under that wing and get experience, and then eventually take on and become principal investigators in their own right. I think local CROs also have a huge part to play in changing the strategic role of sponsors. We've often relied on big pharmaceutical companies coming into the industry. We've relied on them to bring their clinical trials. But I think there's also a number of smaller biotechs. We have academia, we have researchers who are standalone, who want to do clinical trials. And as local CROs, we have that capacity to be nimble, to be flexible in the way we carry out our clinical trials. So we can afford to give them a tailor-made approach, something that's bespoke to their needs, which some of the larger organizations may not have. This then also spurs local research and ensures that local pharma, biotechs, organizations, academia have a responsible person walking along with them. There's also a huge drive, I think that's being missed here, and that's investigator-led studies. I think, as we say today, we need more researchers here. If we see, if as a researcher, as an investigator, as a physician, you see that there's a need that needs to be followed up and the large organizations not doing so, you can do it. You can reach out and start an investigation on your own. Sometimes, you get some donations in the way of the drug, that would help. But I think sometimes then you also need somebody who can support you from a local level and ensure that you have the infrastructure to carry out such a trial. I think all of this wraps up in how to leverage the local knowledge. We have been in the area, we have known the challenges that you face. We have conducted enough clinical trials to have lessons learned, that you don't have to fall into the same pitfalls as other people have. So with that local knowledge and expertise, we can ensure that any trial that you conduct is carried out successfully. There's also another part of this where we can bring in other working partners, strategies that perhaps haven't been traditional to date. We can bring in working models that support the infrastructure that is lacking. And we will hear about this later, where we can get a partner who can work with us to provide the logistical supply of clinical materials. This is hugely expensive and labor intensive. And if you can work with somebody else who can provide that, then I think you have a successful site and a clinical trial that you're running. So finally, I wanted to summarize by asking, why would you want to work with a local CRO? The answer is simple. We've done it. We've gone through the lessons. We've learned from experience what not to do. We can hold your hand as you carry out these clinical trials. We can support you, provide you with infrastructure if you require this. We can provide you insights into what the sponsor is looking for. And therefore, we can also ensure that you have success in your clinical trials.
Thank you very much, Anne, for that presentation. And I want to invite the last speaker of the evening, Rob van den Berg. He is going to be talking to us about IP warehousing in East Africa. And believe that, Rob, you have your slides, so you can go ahead and share your slides as I introduce you. Rob is the managing director of Sub-Saharan Africa at Oximio, which includes operations in South Africa and the newly opened facility in Kenya. Both are licensed pharmaceutical distribution warehouses, specializing in global clinical trial supply procurement, comparator sourcing, repackaging, storage, and distribution. Oximio, which was previously known as the SMO Group, has a rapidly expanding the storage, G&P storage services network focused on Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Along with the two facilities that serve the Sub-Saharan African region, Oximio also operates through a partner depot in Egypt. Oximio in Kenya runs a bonded depot, which serves as a gateway to East, Central, and West Africa. This enables cost-effective solutions and quick turnaround times in the region and substantially improves patient access to medicine, particularly in difficult-to-reach areas and marginalized populations. About Rob a little bit, he entered the clinical trial logistics market in 2002 and continues to build and maintain mutually beneficial relationships with local and international sponsors, manufacturers, and other key stakeholders, including regulators and the CROs. As a leader, team player, and brand ambassador, and through Oximio's clients, Rob is proud of the wider range of clinical research being attracted into Sub-Saharan Africa. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you very much. I don't have to even do my slides. You've stolen the show. Oh, no, thank you very much, honored guests. I'm privileged to be in front of you on my screen, and I hope I'm clear enough in my presentation. More about the company. It started 2004, plus minus 2004 in the Ukraine, and they've steadily grown into a massive network of 9 depots across Europe. We have about 300 staff members. We've actually grown about 40% in the last year, which shows you how rapidly and how determined we are to spread our field to get patient access to medicine. We currently do about 1,632 end-to-end clinical trials on a day-to-day basis, reaching about 500 million patients. So we really are a very well-networked company when it comes to the sponsor networks that we have. We are head officed in the UK, and with the company's registry, it's open book. Our turnover is roughly 27 million euros per annum, which gives a lot of credibility to yourself as researchers that we're not a tiny company trying to make a difference in a go down in Kenya, but we really want to obviously really add value to the entire region. I hope my slide comes down. As was mentioned in the brief, we are a gateway into Africa with our depot network, and I'll spend a little bit of time on these four bullet points, which are essential to what we are wanting to provide, or which we are providing into West.
Rob, sorry, a quick interruption. Can you kindly share your slides because we can't see them?
Are they gone now? Okay.
Sorry about that.
How to do that? Don't you know? Yeah. This is challenging. That's there. I'm offline, or can you still hear me? Maybe over there.
We can hear you, it's just that we haven't seen your slides.
Wait. Okay, screen 2. There. Ah, that's a bit better. Can you see the slide now?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's the second slide. All right. Just make sure. Okay, cool. Yeah, our gateway into Africa, as I've said, those 4 bullet points are essential to what we offer in the region. And the region that we are targeting is West, Central and East Africa clinical trial development. And if I can read the top point, Oximio is shaping the supply chain infrastructure in Africa to improve quality, expedite the timelines of multinational clinical trials, to ultimately reach greater patient populations. And in a nutshell, as we explained, we store clinical trial medicine, comparators, ancillaries, etc., and we ship it around the globe. So, and that is our expertise. And what we brought into Kenya now, and we left, I mean, my wife and I jumped in the car on the 4th of July. We drove up through Botswana, Zambia, Tanzania, etc., landed in Nairobi. And 100 days later, we've got a fully licensed clinical research facility, storage facility for the area. So that was a good game changer and a quick one for us. And the network that we have with the likes of your colleagues, Prof. Ogutu, Prof. Walter, etc., is our presentations to the PPB has been very clear of what we would like to do in the area. And now the approval is a 1 import license for the duration of the clinical trial, a blanket import license. And as we know before, there's multiple imports into the country, into a lot of the countries, which is time consuming, it's costly, and your researchers are spending a lot of time at the PPB and KRA and customs to try and get the clearance of it. We handle it all for you on your behalf, making it a lot more quicker, and with 1 import license for the duration of the clinical trial, reduces the cost, obviously, back to the sponsor, which makes it attractive for your sponsors. The IR, your import of record or import license facilitation, we have experts in the entire region who are well-versed in applying for import licenses as an import of record through a power of attorney of the logistics portion. So once again, we take that responsibility, or we'll facilitate that on your behalf, again, to hasten the time of getting the import license so that your window period, you can supply drug within a more tighter and more window period. The rapid delivery times is self-explanatory, because now we have a warehouse in Kenya. So moving trial medicine across border, obviously it has its challenges, but it's a lot faster, which I'll show in the following slides than moving from the EU or USA. So your cold chain risk has less risk, and we can improve the timelines even through to Gabon or even Morocco for that matter. And the last bullet point, also very essential, is we have met with the KRA about a bonded warehouse license, and they said, no, have a transit depot, because you're moving stock in and out of Kenya. Let's make it faster, let's make it easier and less onerous for you from a customs and a regulatory point of view, but having a transit depot so you can shift it in and out. And what we can also do there is we can manipulate stock as well. So we can do just-in-time labeling, repackaging, and labeling, in-country labeling within that transit depot area, which I'll explain a little bit further now as well. Yeah, there we are. We're up on the road to Limuru. It's on the Eldoret-Malaba Road. It's about 20-30 k's out of Nairobi. And I believe the road will get finished one day before elections. So I think the guys, the workers are quite busy 24/7 to get that road cleared for us. This slide gives you just a brief description of our rapid delivery time. Typically, your shipments at the moment, if I could get up my pointer, laser pointer. If it's direct to site shipments, and it typically happens now, first of all, you'll have capacity issues because they're sending bulk shipments most of the time. But in these cases, your shipping time, this is excluding customs, waiting, and import licenses, could take up to 132 hours from the US and the EU. Having a warehouse or a facility in Kenya is a no-brainer for us. We can do rapid transports right through to the West African ports as well. The credo boxes or the shippers that we use, the validated shippers at 2 to 8 degrees or even -20, 15 to 25 degrees are validated for 96 hours. And in your difficult to reach areas, maybe the northern part of Uganda, if we have a road issue of trying to get to a smaller clinic, we will utilize the Russian doll system, where it's a shipper within a shipper. So even the local borders can take it up within a 5-day period up to your really remote areas. So we can really reach marginalized and difficult to reach area in many of the areas that we're testing. The cost comparison is vital for a clinical trial. And as you mentioned earlier, the cost of running a trial, especially the logistics portion, is huge. We can safely save an enormous amount, a good percentage, which I'll show on this slide. And here I'm depicting a typical 2-year study across a few states, having a number of shipments being direct to site of the typical way of doing things. And this is in euros. That's the cost of the logistics portion of just the shipping of the drug to the sites. And on the right-hand side, having a bonded warehouse, having smaller shipments to the sites, more manageable, and without any temperature excursion, or minimize the risk, it is over about a 40% difference in a cost saving. Multiply that out with a number of clinical trials in the area, and once again, your sponsors will definitely consider this. On the Kenya depot, we can obviously manage direct to site shipments. Many of your clinical trials prefer direct to site shipments, and we can certainly do that and facilitate customs clearance. But the repackaging, relabeling, and many of the other aspects, 15 to 25, -80 degrees Celsius, we're moving it in January. We're flying 2 -80s up. So we can certainly our services, customs clearance record, all our logistics solutions is facilitated by a state-of-the-art facility. As I said earlier, we are a licensed facility, so your sourcing of comparators, ancillaries, equipment, we can even look at equipment rentals as well. It can certainly be entertained. And because it's in country and in a warehouse facility that is under strict storage conditions, we can effectively send the drug and the comparators together with the IMP. Again, it's a major cost saving to the sponsors. And the last little slide there, in Europe, we do a lot of patient-centric services of picking up patients with taxi services. That we are certainly looking at in Kenya as well, is whether we can do direct-to-patient supplies as well. And finally, the Kenya depot is managed obviously by a small group of people, and we're growing, hopefully exponentially. And we are supported by a great team from global finance, legal, HR, IT, etc. But most important of all is our marketing department. We have access to many pharmaceutical companies, your sponsors, your foreign sponsors, that are potentially have waited on not doing work in Africa. We know that we can attract new sponsors with our facility, and in Kenya, it'll be new trials, new technology, and as Dr. Guto corrected me, it's actually new interventions. But then economic development and also to build capacity will obviously be increased at the same time. Thank you so much for the time on the webinar. Asante sana.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob, for that. Okay, yeah, so thank you very much for that. I would like to invite Professor Jaupe. I believe that you are online, just to make a few remarks, and then we will handle the questions. But I'll just say very briefly that Professor Jaupe is a professor of medical microbiology and tropical medicine, and also the director of Tavi Institute of Clinical Research at the University of Nairobi. He has managed or run and has more than 30 years experience conducting clinical research in various aspects of clinical infectious diseases transmission, treatment, and control, and has been appearing on many clinical trials over the past few years or several years around vaccines for HIV, Ebola, and COVID, and ARTS, and he has published more than 200 articles. I want to give over to you, Professor Jaupe. I hope you can hear us. You kindly unmute yourself and make a few remarks, and then we will handle the questions and answers, the question session.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me for the excellent presentation. I think mine is just to say that clinical trials are becoming very important for countries and nations. And unfortunately, as Dr. Guto indicated at the beginning of his presentation, we don't seem as a country to be facilitating the conduct of clinical trials. Clinical trials, there's a time we did an assessment just for HIV clinical trials, and the amount of funding that came into the country to ensure that clinical trials on HIV alone were being conducted was phenomenal. And this can be seen as Professor Guto clearly indicated, the benefits in terms of science, but there are also other benefits in terms of economics, job creation, and many other things that come with clinical trials. So I think for me, as far as I'm concerned, it is high time that we put some emphasis, and the government supported the conduct of clinical trials in this country. Secondly, I think many times the politicians also don't seem to understand what clinical trials are all about. And you hear politicians making statements that are quite reckless that would then discourage the conduct of clinical trials in this country. The concept of the population being used as guinea pigs and so on and so forth. And a case in point, and I just want to end with this, when COVID vaccine clinical trials were beginning, when the whole world was coming together to get a solution of this COVID pandemic, you remember many of our leaders indicated that no clinical trials of COVID vaccines would take place in this country. And there are very many negative things about COVID vaccines. And then when we got the world got COVID vaccines, we were the same ones who rushed to say how the world is so unfair by not providing us with the vaccines. And yet, we are the ones who told our people not to participate in clinical trials to try and get a solution. So this discussion is very timely, and I'm hoping that out of it, we can be able to have a particular stand for the government that it is high time that we took clinical trials more seriously, facilitate it, remove all the bottlenecks, as was described by Professor Gutu. Too many offices to go to, and they keep on adding. At the moment now, we even had one of the latest kid in the block with regard to wanting to approve clinical trials at the county governments. You get all the approvals, you get ethics approval, you get the Pharmacy and Poisons Board approval, you get NACOSTI permit, and then you still have to go to the county government for another approval. So the net effect is that it takes so long for one to get approvals to conduct clinical trials, whereas the rest of the world is making it easier, facilitating it. We are going backward by making it much, much more difficult for us to conduct clinical trials. I'll pause there and probably join in the discussions when time allows. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for those remarks. I also want to give Dr. Nelly Mugo a few minutes to make some remarks. Nelly Mugo is a senior principal clinical research scientist at Kenya Medical Research Institute. She's a reproductive health specialist with 3 decades of work experience and has a clinical trial site that is located in Thika, where mostly she's focusing her research on sexually transmitted infections and particularly HIV and cervical cancer prevention. Then you can take over now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bosire. I'm really pleased, to thank the organizers for inviting me to say something today, and also that we are having this discussion around clinical trials. So maybe I'll pick it up from my colleague and friend, Professor Jaoko. And many things have been said today, which are really pertinent about why clinical trials are so important, why we need to conduct clinical trials in Africa and in our own countries, and grow the muscle and specialty and expertise to implement clinical trials. I want to walk us back a little bit in history, not so far off, when Professor Nduati and Professor Boringasha did that trial on breastfeeding at a time when it was standard of care to stop breastfeeding if a mother was HIV infected. And their first clinical trial within our region demonstrated that the mortality rates were extremely high when mothers were not breastfeeding. So when children didn't get HIV, they still ended up dying from diarrheal diseases and other complications. And they carried on that information to actually give to the world the information that exclusive breastfeeding could be safe, and especially when it was added on with ART. Now, that question was never going to be asked in the West because they had access to bottle feeding. It could only be asked for Africa, and Africa's in our region. I remember during the same period when actually I started doing research, and one of my colleagues, Professor Kieri, was working in the PMTCT forum, and the question was, what does it cost for a woman in Kibera to safely bottle feed a baby? Because people said, well, we'll give African women bottle milk, and they can feed them. What does it cost to buy charcoal to sterilize when other children don't have milk? What I'm really trying to say is we have special problems and we need to have the right answers to our questions. We need to be able to ask them and answer them. It's the same journey to single-dose nevirapine. Primarily before, and I'm talking PMTCT, though as you heard, I work in PrEP and HIV prevention and cervical cancer prevention, because it really takes us back to why we need to do this work. Some of the things we routinely do now, we don't recognize what it took to get there. And there's a lot of debate of why should you give an inferior product when you can give them literally was it almost 9 months with intravenous AZT during delivery, which I remember at that time I worked on locum at Aga Khan, we estimated the cost at 90,000 shillings. Now you can imagine who had 90,000 shillings in the early 90s. It just wasn't there. So the question of doing single-dose nevirapine research could only be done for our region by our people. So I hope I've made a strong case. Currently, we know HIV, the work that Professor Joko is doing on HIV vaccine trials, those cannot be done in the West because HIV burden isn't where it is with them. They don't have enough incident infections. So if we don't have the skills and know-how to do this work, we will not answer our problems. We were told about DNDi. Malaria, Professor Gutu's been doing malaria vaccine work. Malaria in the West is not their problem, it's our problem. And we know how much malaria kills our babies. So the fact that we've moved to knowing that we have an effective malaria vaccine is the product of us doing clinical trials in this region. So I just, I'll sit back sort of and go back a little bit and say that doing research has changed my thinking a lot. I worked for years, I worked in Machakos, I looked in Gertrude's. I was in Ops Gynae at the Kenyatta National Hospital, which I still feel is my mother hospital, for many years. And it's only when you start doing research where you recognize the gaps that can be answered only by evidence-based data. Some of this is about delivery. I'm always saying, for example, those of you who work in clinical settings, you work every day, you work really hard in the diabetic clinic, hypertensive clinic, epilepsy clinic. You're knowledgeable and very vast in your expertise of managing these diseases with the tools that you get given from other countries. And I think this is what Professor Gutu was talking about. Question is, how well do these products work for our population? Are they affordable? What makes our people adherent or not adherent? How well are they able to come for visits? How many visits can they cope with? Because the end product you desire is that your patient is adherent, has controlled diabetes within your environment and settings. And you can see I can really carry on and talk a lot because I'm very passionate about this area. And I'll just add in a little bit about the question of implementation science. After we have the products that we know work, how well can we deliver them in a way that's acceptable to the people who need them, to use them in a way that they can benefit from what is purpose for that product. And I think I'll be failing if I don't say, for example, our current work with our recent data showing efficacy for 1 dose of HPV vaccine amongst age cohort 15 to 20 is highly effective, and actually as effective as 3 doses. That now in the West, they have effectively implemented 3-dose schedules. They don't have a resource issue. Australia is moving and thinking very hard about elimination. The UK has produced their data. We are very far behind. Being able to show that 1 dose works really well will move us closer to elimination. And we're the only ones who can do this work in our region for ourselves. And I hope that many more clinicians will come on board to do this work, because we need to provide the answers to the health solutions in Africa. And remember, clinical trials are not just about products. They can also be about investigating systems. They can be about delivery processes. Those too can be evaluated in a clinical trial setting. And finally, for anybody listening in the policy space, the amount of barriers to implementing research is struggling us. The cost, as Professor Joko said, is making it very, very hard and making us very uncompetitive for funding. And finally, I hope that at the policy level, we'll also be able to access more local resources so we can target our work where it needs to be to really give answers to the needs of our population. I can carry on for a very, very long time, so I'll rein myself in and stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Nelly. We'll now take a few questions. We may not be able to answer all of them, but let's see if we can answer a few of them. The first question we will take is from Colin Somuga. You said this is for Professor Ogutu. We are scientists. We want to do the best possible with available data, basically. Are we the right region or country? Do we have the data to make us the right country or region? Is the data user-friendly? Can we leverage the data among us to make it a non-competitive space? That is one. Maybe the other question is from Victor Mdune, and he said this is for all presenters. We are aware that South Africa is well ahead in terms of attracting sponsors, the number of sites, and even a CRO presence. So the question is, he says that rarely do you find a study done in Africa without a site in South Africa, majority might add. What parallels can we draw from South Africa? How can we close that gap? Kenya has skilled and trained personnel to match South African sites. Is it a cost issue or just preference that goes beyond the target groups? I think you can keep noting the questions. I'll ask one more. What about clinical trials for medical devices such as ventilators? Are there any local experiences and what procedures are different from existing trials? I think for the way forward that Walter you asked about, and I believe when the EFJ team comes to wrap up at the end, they will tell us a bit more about the way forward from this talk, especially because this has been so important, yet it's also really has brought to light a lot of challenges that exist. So maybe we can start with addressing those questions for now. Maybe we can start with you, Professor Gutu.
Okay, so thank you very much for the question. And I think one of the things that comes up when we talk of the data, we have the data, but I think one of the main things is the way we collect that data to make it user-friendly. And I think that's one of the things that possibly we need to work on. But there's a lot of data that is available in the country. If you look at the amount of data that are from health facilities, half-year house, from the health information management system, is huge. But not much is being done with it. And I think these are some of the things that we are currently working on. How can we leverage academia to work with the ministry to ensure that this data can be harnessed and used appropriately and make the right decisions? We have tried to look at some of the pieces of data that's available to really make good conclusions out of them. So we have data, is creating the right framework and the trust that the policymakers need and also everybody has, and we can then move on. The issue of trials being in South Africa is purely a default thing that work on their favor. Apartheid forced South Africa to develop their own infrastructure to do things for themselves. And that's what the current South Africa is writing on, because they had to do things for themselves because they were locked out from the rest of the world. They have the right infrastructure. The government supportive system. South Africa is doing what is called matching. South Africa would match that fund to make sure they have a bigger fund portfolio, and they are currently supporting some product development, supporting what is coming from the West with their own resources. It is only South Africa that is currently having scientific partnership with the other African countries. We had a partnership between NACOSI and National Research Fund in South Africa. Most of the time, the South African should give you the grant, but the Kenyan bid never comes. So it is much more the enabling environment, and that's why South Africa becomes more competitive. And I think these are the things that we need to work on and possibly move forward. And I think there's something for devices. we work with testing new devices for malaria diagnosis, and we're working on a number of things. So the framework is different, but also you need to invest a lot on having the standard, or what they would call the gold standard diagnostic technique for those devices that you want to test. And this is where there's need for good, robust laboratory infrastructure to support that sort of level. I think these are the things that we need to work on, basically, and make sure that we achieve.
Any additions here, Anne?
If I could just add on to the South Africa comment. Yes, traditionally, a lot of studies have gone to South Africa, but we're seeing a push into sub-Saharan Africa now. Sponsors are realizing the importance of the diversity of data that you can get in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is why it's important that we get the infrastructure right. I think it's important that we get more investigators on board so that the data that we're capturing, which is different from what is in sub-Saharan Africa, we can then contribute meaningfully to this. But there is a push coming, and more and more sponsors are asking, do you have sites outside of South Africa? And we have taken a lot of those studies actually. So it's moving, it's changing.
Right. Thank you very much. Any addition from Professor Jauko?
Can I add to that quickly as well? I'm on the executive committee of the South Africa Clinical Research Association, and I concur there as well. There is a lot of emphasis. I'm on the business development side, a lot of emphasis and push for bringing trials further north, a lot more further north, and to bring it obviously from Europe as well. So we are actively engaging from a South Africa CRO perspective to engage not only for South Africa, is to promote the continent. So just to give you the assurance that we are hot on the heels of regulatory and sponsors to spread the load amongst us.
Thank you very much, Rob. Prof. Jauko, any addition to that? Dr. Mugo?
Hi, Dr. Muthune, how are you? So the question of equitable distribution of work, I think the question of infrastructure is really big. South Africa has one of the best laboratories with standardized care. We are still exporting now when we do clinical trials because we are minimizing shipping samples to the West. Now we're shipping to South Africa. So we really do need to set up those infrastructures locally. So we need the support to do that. We have the human resource. We need to go beyond that, but we will grow. I think we're in the right direction. And but it's difficult for people who are starting off, setting up teams, running out of resources. When you've put people together, it becomes a very difficult environment in many ways. So I really hope, Rob Berg, that what you're saying will come to fruition.
Yeah, we, Dr. Mugo, 100% support you all the way. We're not philanthropists. We are business people, and knowing that by bringing additional sponsors, new technologies, etc., into the area is going to build the capacity. It's going to bring more researchers in. I mean, look what's happening at with Prof Walter with his cancer setup as well. I mean, that's a game changer for the whole of Africa. So it's really people are watching Africa from Europe. We're seeing it from the Oxymio side, where we are doing many RFQs for work. Yes, it's South Africa, but a lot of in the equatorial region of Africa. And the lab samples, it is to close the loop. Those lab samples is an issue or is a challenge in the entire region as well. And we are seriously looking at implementing systems in place for that as well. It's not going to work overnight, not going to happen overnight. I've signed a 5-year lease for our warehouse, so we're here for a long time. We're going to make it work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think because also of time, we've run quite late, almost 9, but I can see people are still very engaged. So I want to thank everyone who attended, and also especially the speakers for taking the time to prepare and to make this presentation. We hope that perhaps there will be another follow-up to get deeper and get to learn more. I see that there are a few people, young people here, maybe medical students, maybe interns. I hope you've seen the opportunities that exist in clinical trial space. And I hope that that becomes maybe a trigger for you, and even those online that will have people out of this wanting to join that space. Now, because of time again, I would like to invite Dr. Ubonyo and also to make a few remarks, a few comments. I see Dr. Ubonyo, you're online. Kindly take the time, and then I think you'll invite Dr. Kigondo to wrap up for us.
Thanks very much, Dr. Bosire, for that, and thank you very much to our speakers for joining us this evening. It's been a very interesting discussion. I also noticed we had other senior colleagues joining us in the panel. I noticed Dr. Hamaluba, who is the head of clinical trials at the KEMRI Wellcome Trust site in Kilifi. This is a discussion I think that will be ongoing for some time. And I really want to thank the Center for Clinical Trials Research at KEMRI for their talks and contribution this evening, as well as all our guest speakers. I'll pass on to Dr. Kigondo, who will do the official closing on behalf of the National Executive Committee of Kenya Medical Association. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avery. Thank you very much to everyone who has attended this talk. I want to welcome our online viewers for dinner. There is dinner after this. Sponsored by Oxemia. I can see Rob there smiling. I think you can come and have dinner, sponsored by Oxemia. I want to take this opportunity also to really thank our president of Kenya Medical Association, Dr. Were. Dr. Were has been very instrumental in pushing the research agenda for Kenya Medical Association. And with his presence, he has actually been able to mobilize a lot of the people that we are seeing around. And Dr. Nchafasto is the convener of our research committee. KEMRI has a research committee, and Dr. Amin, seated right there, is one of the members. Amin, raise your hand. Yeah. And it meets every month after a webinar on this. So research is at our heart. Dr. Baraza asked that private hospitals will start getting engaged in research. In the house, we have one of the biggest private hospital owners, Dr. Abdi. I think you need to approach him to try to improve. He oversees quite a number of private hospitals. He's KEMRI, very strong KEMRI member, former chairman of Nairobi division. I used to be now above him. In the house, we also, when you produce research, it has to be documented. In the house, we have the convener, the editor of the East African Medical Journal, Professor Yonga is in the house there. The East African Medical Journal, born in 1924, had died a bit, was resuscitated by Professor Lukoya Atoli, who handed the baton over to Yonga. And there's a book of which Professor Okeo is the boss. and younger is the KYM form. So we want more productions this research being translated into East African medical journal. And for any queries, currently we have the very able Mariam, raise your hand. All the papers are sent to her, and East African Medical Journal is a really powerful journal that is continuing to keep the research project up. I want to thank the IT team of Peter. Peter has been very instrumental. As you can see, KEMRI is very IT savvy. Rose knows how we manage her trainings, and we really thank our IT team led by Peter. And we thank, I can see medical students in the house. This is good. KMA is a place where we mentor the young so that as we exit, they also take up. I want to thank the medical students and all the presenters who are presented. They are very impressed with clinical drugs. And I'll wrap up by thanking my teacher, what's her name? Nelly. And with a small story, Professor Ndwati and Professor Mborigacha, I worked with them. Part of the reason I am a consultant of obstetrician gynecology is that one of my studies was a subset of the Kesho-Bora study, the biggest clinical trial that had a big impact on the management of HIV in the world. Yeah? And I think Dr. Nelly Gubo has actually outlined what, and from that time, what I saw is that what stuck with me is that you need local solutions to local problems. HIV might affect the world, but it affects Kenya very differently from any other place. And that can only be done via clinical trials. The COVID pandemic, as Baraza has said, has provided a platform on which we, and I heard Jaoko there complaining about politicians. No, you are the one, you are the scientists, you are the one who has that knowledge. You can't say the politician will politic. So it is for you as the expert to convince the politician the need for clinical research. And it is very important. What one Dr. Barasa said that you can do the clinical work, but the politics must be played. So let us not fear entering into that space of playing politics so that we can push evidence-based medicine ahead. And KMA is there to play politics. If you have any problem, call us. We know how to play politics and push the health agenda forward. And with that, we hope that in the process, we are trying to get NACOSTI registration for KMA so that those are small barriers that we are having are, as an association, because we are the professionals, as an association, we are able to facilitate clinical trials. And with all those partners I had speaking today, I didn't know clinical trials were that big. I was a participant, but now we have the necessary contacts, African clinical trials, our sponsors for the dinner, you see, all those things. So with that, I also want to thank Rose for having facilitated all this. We worked with Rose in KEMRI during the COVID time, so we needed to educate people on COVID. And my challenge to all of you is, let us do, especially in this period of COVID, let us do more trials on COVID. Part of the reason we are having vaccine hesitancy, I've got an AstraZeneca vaccine double dose. I don't know what my platelets are. Maybe those are some of the problems that are causing vaccine hesitancy. We need someone to be taking us blood every 6 weeks, storing it and saying that A and this is so that we demystify this thing. We cannot continue playing politics when science is available to actually demystify this. Yeah? And the naysayers are correct. You have to show them the science that what you're saying, you can't be pushing vaccines and you know, where is the data? But that said, I think I want to bring this session to a close, and on behalf of the National Executive Council of KMA, I want to thank all the participants for that and invite all of you to dinner. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's just that.